Hey, y'all, welcome back to Let's Talk Esports, our final episode of the week here as we get ready for the start of the 2023 CBLOL Split 2 playoffs. My name is Yeso, back once again, and today we're going through my round one predictions. If you did watch the latest episode of Gringos Liberados, you would have heard my predictions, at least in short form. But I want to talk about them just a little bit more here and give you guys just a little tease of what to expect this weekend. And important to note, you should come out and watch the shows this weekend. I will be hosting on Friday and Saturday for both Fluxu versus VKS, as well as Pain versus INTZ. And then, of course, Red and Loud on Sunday that I will be able to just kick back and enjoy as a fan. But make sure to come out, watch the shows this weekend. But let's just jump right into it and talk a little bit about these few matchups. Of course, everything starts on Friday with our losers bracket matchup, the 5th and 6th seeds, Fluxu versus INTZ. And this is this is a really interesting matchup. Of course, probably one of the biggest storylines for this matchup is that Fluxu has had an almost identical trajectory this split as they did last split. Started a little slow, absolutely heated up and kind of went on a tear in the middle of the season, and then they kind of stumble into the playoffs, finish in 5th place, and then they're in a matchup with the 6th seed, who a lot of folks are probably 100% ready to predict that they should beat. And if you remember what happened last split when they played against Furia, they got dumpstered. They got swept by Furia in that first round matchup, and their split was done. And then this team, of course, didn't make any changes, came into this split, and end up in this same 5th seed spot. And we're going to have to see if it's, if history is going to repeat itself. VKS, on the other hand, is a team that a lot of us honestly had a lot of high hopes for. We felt that the Trigo and Damage acquisitions for their bottom lane made a lot of sense for the way that this team plays. But the problem is the volatility that we knew existed with Grell, with the top side of this map, it felt as volatile as ever this split, and they were so up and down week in and week out, and it's just so hard to pin this team down. And if you've been watching the shows as of late, I've been very vocal that I'm out on this team. I've been selling my VKS stock that I had kind of early in the season because they're just too volatile, and I don't trust this team, especially when it comes to best of fives, where you need some consistency, right? You need to be able to win 3 of 5 games against the best teams in Brazil. And I have a hard time believing that VKS can do that. So when it comes to this matchup, it's going to be really fascinating because, of course, for VKS, it's going to be focused, towards the top side of the map, right? Gigo has been the biggest carry for this team. And, of course, Grell's early game is so integral to the way that this team plays. Meanwhile, on the side of Fluxu, the focus is on Brunsey, right? Highest damage share of any player in Brazil this split. Huge DPM numbers. He is the primary carry for this team. Of course, House is very important in his champion pool, and what he's able to get access to in Champion Select is going to be very important for this team. But it's going to be really interesting, and the question will be, does Grell shift his focus away from the top lane and try to get bot lane and kind of set Brunsey behind, or do they just try and index into, trying to get Gigo as powerful as possible? Of course, Tay is a weak point for this Fluxu roster, and certainly a part of the map that you could try to attack, and they could certainly go for that. And then the question is, can Gigo carry harder than Brunsey? Which, if that is a strategy, I think a lot of people would argue that no, he won't. And that'll be a really interesting question. So, will VKS adapt? How do they want to play on the map? And of course, can Fluxu get Brunsey to these breakpoints where he can take over the game? And then what kind of role is House going to play in this series? So a lot of things to look at here. A few picks to keep an eye on, of course, will be Gigo on Gwen has been a very big pick for him, as well as some other carries. In the mid lane, of course, they're going to be looking at House for the, Azir pick, as well as his LeBlanc. And it's important to note that probably House's 2 biggest highlight plays of this split came in their second matchup with VKS on Azir. Two big Emperor's Divide plays that were really impressive. I got to cast the game and it was really fun to watch. And if he can get that pick, that's the kind that he can kind of almost take over as that primary carry, takes the pressure off of Brunson. Not that I think Brunson minds having that pressure, having that weight on his shoulders, but the better House performs in this series, the better chances Fluxu has. And it's not because they can't rely on Brunson, but it's just more difficult when it all comes down to that 80 carry. And it just means that, one mistake for Brunson is that much more punishing when Howes isn't quite performing at his top level. When he is, it just gives a little more room for error and a little more flexibility for Fluxu. Meanwhile, VKS, it's going to be the Growl and Gigo show. They have shown at times this split, especially when Trigo picks Kaisa, that they can and are sometimes willing to play towards the bottom lane. I'm not sure if that's the solution in this best of 5, but we'll have to see. But a lot of different angles here for this one. And of course, important to note that these teams did split matchups. 1-1 were their records. Also important to note, VKS, they are the fastest team in CBLOL, and part of that is the fact that they lose games incredibly quickly. 6 of their 8 losses this split were under 30 minutes. Important to note that on the other side, Fluxu only played 3 sub 30-minute games all split long. They won all 3 of those. So VKS, they win fast, but they lose even faster. And this team tends to, when they get behind, they kind of run it down. So we'll have to see how things play out on that front. My prediction, though, for this one, I will be sticking with what I said on the podcast. I'm saying 3-1 to Fluxu. And that one win for VKS is just because, unfortunately, I do feel like there will be at least one game where either Grell just, makes some magic happen in the early game and really kind of snowballs the top side of the map, or Fluxu throws, which unfortunately is something that they have done on a fairly common basis during this split. They'll get a lead and they'll find a way to throw it away. And, unfortunately, Brunson will be fed, but not fed enough and not able to make a big enough play to bring them back. So I'm taking 3-1 Fluxu in this series. They will avoid the similar fate of last split, hopefully. Jumping into Saturday's series, and this is our first place Pain Gaming, who finished at 14-4 this split up against INTZ. And important to note, INTZ beat Pain just a couple of weeks ago. And this is a really interesting matchup because a lot of folks, you would look at this and say, hey, first seed versus fourth seed, Pain should be heavily favored, especially because Pain have, at multiple points this split and definitely finishing, have looked like the best team in Brazil, with the volatility of Red, a team that finished at the same record, but with the kind of amount of really weird and big comebacks that they had to make, the Nexus defenses, Pain has just looked like a cleaner team. And the fact that the biggest kind of standout aspect of this Pain team is how they close games very cleanly and very efficiently. When they get leads and they get rolling, they just finish games in a very, very clean fashion. Up against now an INTZ team that, of course, are kind of the upstarts. This was a team that a lot of folks didn't have high expectations for after their rough performance in Split 1 and then not making any roster changes, but they've shown that keeping the band together and the kind of growth that they were leaning into has paid off, right? They go into the final week, they beat Fluxu, they secure this 4th seed, and they've looked good against Pain. I rewatched both of their games from the regular season just this morning, and it's important to note that INTZ won both early games, and both of these teams are the best early game teams in the league in terms of goal difference at 15. Pain in first place at just over 1,400, INTZ in second place at just below 700 gold ahead. That goal difference at 15 minutes. So the two best early game teams, but it's important to note that INTZ actually won both early games in the 2 prior times these teams met this split, with about an average gold lead in those matchups of plus 1,000 gold. And that's pretty good. And it was in the first game, unfortunately, just a couple of team fights that went awry that catapulted Pain into the lead of that game. And as we said, when they get into a lead, especially the later in the game that they grab that lead, they close very efficiently, and they did just that. Going into the second time around, it's important to note a few champions jumped out again. ZZK played Olaf in both games. Yampi played Sejuani in both games, as well as Nia playing Rel in both games against Pain. This time around, Weiser, having made some big plays on the Kennen the first time these teams played, didn't get the Kennen pick this time around, instead on the Dar. That has been a really good pick for him this split. But ZZK gets a really early solo kill. Things get rolling. INTZ with a stronger early game this time around, and they did really look back. Ninja Kiwi's Sivir looked really good. Yampi was moving around the map very efficiently. A couple of team fights weren't quite as clean. And it's also important to note that a big part of the success for Pain in the first game was how cleanly B-Voy was playing, and he was playing Xayah. And that Featherstorm in multiple team fights was so integral to him making big plays, staying safe, and keeping that uptime. This time around on the Aphelios, didn't have the same bit of FUD this time around. He struggled a little bit in team fights, and I really feel like ZZK and the rest of the NTZ roster did a great job of shutting down B-Voy, who is so integral in this team's mid and late game and in team fighting. And the fact that Weiser didn't have the solid laning phase that we're used to seeing from him, and INTZ took over the game and finished it very, very impressively. So as I get to my prediction here, there's a little asterisk here because I am picking Pain to win, and I'm taking Pain 3-2. But it's also important to note that this is, and interestingly enough, with my next prediction, this will make be even odder. This is the prediction I'm actually least confident in this weekend, because INTZ just actually feels like they have a really good matchup against Pain. They've looked really solid against them in both games they play the Split. And the big thing is, for me, is that ZZK is such a big driving force for this team, and it's hard to ban him out. Right? He's played Olaf a bunch this split. He played it in 2 games against Pain. He probably won't get it in this series, but there's a wealth of other things that he can bring to the table that he can take over the game on. And I think he's going to get that opportunity. And he's shown that he, at least this split in 2 games, small sample size, has Weiser's number. And that's impressive, because that's the dude who we voted as our very clear first team All-Pro top laner, our MVP in Brazil. And I think ZZK maybe just has a really good matchup here, player versus player. So I am taking Pain, but I'm least confident in this because I think INTZ has a legitimate shot at an upset. And I think they're really going to give Pain a run for their money. And I think this is probably going to be the most compelling best of 5 of this weekend. So definitely make sure you don't miss this one. So far that's Fluxu 3-1 over VKS, Pain 3-2 over INTZ. Let's go to Sunday and talk about Red Cannons and Loud. Red, of course, bumped out of first place in the last weekend of the split. They do finish tied at 14-4, but Pain wins the tiebreakers, so Red gets second. They don't get choice of their opponent, and that means they have to play against Loud, who, of course, are the killers come playoff time. And, of course, this is the Loud team that has been leveling up throughout this split. Started slow, big win streak, 0-2 weekend, then another big win streak, and Loud's coming in on an absolute tear. They've won their 6 previous games coming into the playoffs here. Important to note, though, they are 0-2 against Red this split. Red has beaten them in both games. Pretty dominant the first time around. Much, much closer in the second game these two teams played. And this series is kind of an enigma, right? Loud, for a good chunk of the split, looked like the best team. Of course, their only blemish for so long the split was that early loss against Fluxu. But of course, they fell to Fluxu again, dropped a couple games as well late in the split, one of them being to VKS on the last day of the split. And there's a lot of question marks around this Red roster. And of course, one of the biggest questions has been, resource allocation. You've got 3 really standout, talented laners that all are worth investing resources in, but it's been a little difficult. Of course, with the way the meta has gone, Titan has gotten the wealth of those resources and has been a big player for this team. But there's also the volatility we have to talk about in his play. He will make you make big plays to win your team games. He will also make plays to lose your team games at times. And we're not sure what Red is going to show up in these playoffs. It's also important to note that, we talk about Titans volatility, but it's not just him. This team has been volatile. They have where Payne has been really good at closing games, Red has struggled. They've also had to make very big comebacks against teams that on paper you would think they had no right even coming close to losing against. And that makes me question this team a lot. Then you go into Loud side. Of course, bit of streakiness this split, and they definitely started slow. And the big thing is that it's been the top side of the map that has struggled to kind of round into form. Took Croc a while, took Robo even longer, but it's important to note that Robo has looked very good the last couple of weeks. And while it was his Olaf that was kind of the scary pick for him a split ago, this time around it's looking like the Jax. He has multiple quadra kills on it. He's been really performing on this pick as of late, even despite some kind of tough lane matchups. But who knows how this pans out? Of course, Tinones has took more of a carry role this split, less of a facilitator for the team. The LeBlanc pick has looked really good for him. He's also played the most champions of any player in CBLOL this split and has looked really good doing so. And of course, you've got Root, who has just been Mr. Reliable front to back this split. And then of course you got, the best support in the league in sales. So a lot of good things going for Loud here. And this was definitely my spiciest prediction on the podcast, and I'm saying fuck it, I'm going to stick with it. I predicted on the podcast 3-0 for Loud, and I'm going to stick with it here. It's certainly possible that Red win a game or two. I'm still feeling confident though that Loud win this series, and I'm just betting that they'll be able to take advantage of the volatility of this Red roster. And I think Robo's going to be in playoff form. We saw him rounding into it at the end of the split, and honestly, I think with this last week of preparation and the fact that they only had to kind of look at Red, and despite their previous losses, I think they're going to come in with a good game plan, and I think they're going to be firing, I should say, on all cylinders. Definitely a chance for the side of Red Cannons to make some magic happen and get a big win here. The one thing I'll say, and we talked about this on the podcast, I think the most insane prediction is 3-0 Red because of that aforementioned volatility. I just don't, and granted, you can win a 3-0 that like isn't clean when you look deeper into the games. I just have no faith that team can just win 3 straight games against this Loud team, and definitely not without taking a loss prior. So I'm going to stick with it. So predictions for this weekend: 3-1 Fluxu over VKS, 3-2 Payne over INTZ, and then I'm taking 3-0 Loud over Red Cannons. All of our series start this weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday at 9 a.m. Pacific time over at twitch.tv/CBLOL English. So make sure to come out and watch. The link is also down in the description. And make sure in the comments, drop your predictions. Who do you think is going to win? What are your series scores? Who do you think are maybe going to be some big MVPs, some big playmakers in all of these series? Would love to hear your thoughts. As always, thanks so much for coming to hang out and watching another episode of Let's Talk Esports, and I will hopefully see you in Twitch chat this weekend. Thanks, guys.